My mail carrier saved my life. Or maybe she saved my sanity first. I'm still not entirely sure which one matters more. Her name is Dottie, and she has been delivering mail on my street for 11 years. She knows everybody's name, everybody's dog, and apparently everybody's business. I used to think that was a little nosy. Now I want to buy that woman flowers every single week for the rest of my life. It was a Tuesday in late October when she stopped me at the end of my driveway. I was heading back inside after checking the mailbox. Just the usual stack of circulars and a bill from the electric company, and she was still at the curb, engine idling, leaning out the window of her little truck. "Excuse me, Hon," she said. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" I turned around. Of course not. She had this look on her face that I couldn't quite read. Not quite concern, not quite curiosity. Something between the two, like she'd been debating with herself for a while and finally decided she had to say it. "Your son," she said. "Does he come visit you on Thursdays?" I felt something go still inside me. "My son lives in Phoenix," I said. "He visits a few times a year, not on any regular schedule." She nodded slowly. "What about a young man with a gray pickup? Dark hair, maybe mid-30s? He's been coming by on Thursdays pretty regular. Last 4 or 5 weeks at least. Always parks just around the corner, not in front of your house." She paused. I just thought that was a little odd, the parking. I stood there at the end of my driveway with November cold just starting to settle into the air, and I told her I didn't know who that was. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in the dark and tried to make sense of it, running through the list of people who had a key to my house. That list was very short. My son, who was 1,300 miles away. My neighbor 2 doors down, Beverly, who kept a spare for emergencies. And my daughter-in-law. I should explain something about my daughter-in-law. Her name is Christine, and she and my son have been married for 6 years. I have tried in those 6 years to be the kind of mother-in-law that does not cause problems. I do not drop in unannounced. I do not offer opinions that weren't asked for. I send birthday cards with checks inside, and I do not ask whether they've cashed them. When my son calls, I listen more than I talk. I thought we had a reasonable arrangement. What I did not know, what I would not learn until much later, was that Christine had made a copy of my key 18 months earlier when she and my son had visited for Thanksgiving. She'd told him she'd lost her cell phone charger and might need to run to the car, and she'd asked to borrow my house key. He hadn't thought anything of it. Why would he? I didn't know any of that yet when I stood in my kitchen the next morning, looking around my house with new eyes. Here's what I had noticed over the past few months, things I had explained away one by one. A small ceramic dish on my kitchen windowsill that I was almost certain I'd left on the counter, not the sill. A stack of papers on my desk that seemed shifted, though I couldn't be sure. I am not always the most organized person. My reading glasses turning up in the bathroom when I was nearly certain I'd left them beside my chair. The kind of things that, taken individually, you dismiss. You're 67 years old. You tell yourself. You are tired sometimes. You misplace things. But you don't misplace the same kinds of things over and over. You don't consistently feel like your house has been breathed in and breathed back out while you weren't home. I had started to wonder, genuinely wonder, whether something was going wrong with my mind. I had not said this out loud to anyone. I was afraid to. After Dottie told me about the gray truck, I stopped being afraid and started being something else entirely. I teach a watercolor class on Thursday mornings. I had been doing it for 3 years at the community center downtown, 10 to noon, never missed a session, except for a bad case of the flu the previous winter. It was one of the things I had built for myself after my husband passed. A reason to get up, get dressed properly, be somewhere that expected me. Those 2 hours mattered to me more than I could explain to anyone who hadn't lost a spouse. I left the house every Thursday at 9:45. I returned by 12:30, sometimes a little later if I stopped for groceries. Whoever was coming into my house knew my schedule. That thought landed in my chest like a stone. I spent 2 days thinking about what to do. I considered calling my son, but I didn't know enough yet, and I didn't want to cause a rupture over something I couldn't prove. My son loves his wife. He has always loved her more easily than I have managed to. I did not think he would simply take my word over hers, and I couldn't blame him for that. I needed something real. My neighbor Beverly, not the one who has my spare key, but my next-door neighbor Beverly, who is 73 and sharper than most people half her age, had mentioned something to me once about a camera her grandsons had set up at her house after a package went missing from her porch. Small thing, she'd said, about the size of a deck of cards. Plugs into the wall, connects to your phone, sends you a little video alert whenever it detects motion. I went to the electronics store the very next morning. The young man who helped me was maybe 25, wearing a store polo shirt and a patient expression that told me he spent a lot of his day explaining things to people like me. He did not make me feel foolish. He showed me 3 different models, explained the differences in plain language, and helped me download the application on my phone before I left. The whole thing cost me $140. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes before I went inside. I was thinking about the fact that I was about to set a trap in my own home for someone I hadn't yet identified but suspected I knew. I was thinking about how strange it was to feel like a detective at 67, widowed, retired from 30 years of bookkeeping, a woman who spent her Thursday mornings teaching people how to paint clouds. I went inside and I set the camera up. I put it on the bookshelf in my front hallway, behind a small potted ivy and between 2 of my husband Robert's old woodworking books. Thick spines, unremarkable. The lens faced the door. If anyone came through the front, I would see them. If they came in through the back, through the kitchen door, they would still have to come through the hallway eventually. Either way, I would know. I charged it overnight. I checked the app 4 times before I went to sleep. The live feed showed my empty hallway in slightly greenish night vision color, the coat rack and the table, and the little mirror I'd hung 20 years ago and never moved. Thursday came. I got dressed. I made my coffee. I drank it standing at the kitchen window the way I always do. I packed my bag with my brushes and my portable palette. I left the house at 9:47 and I drove to the community center. The class went fine. I showed my students how to wet the paper before applying color so that the edges blur instead of stop, how to let the paint do what it wants to do, within reason. One of my students, a retired librarian named Augusta, who had been coming for almost 2 years, made a sunrise that morning that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. I told her so. She turned pink with pleasure. That part of my day was real and good and entirely mine, and I held on to it. I drove home by a slightly different route than usual. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, or some instinct I hadn't caught up to yet. I parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a moment before I went inside. The house looked exactly as I had left it. I made myself a cup of tea before I looked at the phone. I needed a moment. I needed to be sitting down. Then I opened the app. There was a motion alert, timestamped at 10:22 in the morning. My hands were steadier than I expected when I pressed play. The front door opened. A man came in first. He was exactly as Dottie had described. Mid-30s, dark hair, wearing a canvas jacket over a flannel shirt. He held the door open. Then Christine came in behind him. I watched my daughter-in-law walk into my house. She had a key. Of course she had a key. I understood that now. She must have copied it during Thanksgiving, must have planned this, must have thought it through. She walked in like she owned the place. That is the only way I know how to describe it. Not nervous, not hurried. Comfortable. The man with her went straight to my desk in the little room I use as an office. He sat down and turned on my computer. Christine went to the kitchen. I could see her open and close drawers. She knew where things were. She had learned where things were over the previous weeks. I understood. On all those Thursday mornings I'd been at the community center. I sat at my kitchen table with my tea cooling in my hands, and I watched 8 minutes of footage. She found my checkbook in the 3rd drawer she opened. I saw her carry it to the desk. I watched the man, I did not yet know his name, write something, flip the page, write again. 3 checks. He wrote 3 checks from my checkbook while I was teaching retired school teachers how to paint clouds. I put the phone face down on the table. I sat very still for a while. Then I called my son. I want to tell you that this conversation was easy. It was not. He went quiet in a way that frightened me. Not a disbelieving quiet, which I had braced for, but a complicated quiet that told me he was somewhere inside himself, trying to hold two things at once that wouldn't fit together. His wife, his mother. The video that I told him I had, that I hadn't sent yet, that I was looking at right now on my kitchen table. "Mom," he said, and then he didn't say anything else for a long moment. "I need you to not call her," I said. "Not yet. I need to talk to someone first." "What kind of someone?" "The legal kind." He came to stay with me that weekend. He drove down from Phoenix, 13 hours, didn't stop except for gas. He arrived Saturday morning looking like he hadn't slept in 2 days, which he probably hadn't. I fed him eggs and toast, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I showed him the footage on my laptop, larger screen, better to see. He watched it 3 times. He didn't say anything for a while after the 3rd time. Then he said, "Who is he?" I told him I didn't know yet. We found out together later that afternoon with the help of the attorney I had called on Friday. A woman named Miss Park, who had been recommended to me by Augusta from my watercolor class, whose son-in-law turned out to be a lawyer. Miss Park was brisk and competent and did not waste my time with anything unnecessary. She told me what I had, what it meant, and what steps to take. The man in the footage was Christine's cousin. His name doesn't matter much to the story, except to say that he had a record, a previous conviction for fraud, from 7 years earlier in another state, which is something Christine had apparently known and not thought worth mentioning when she married into my family. The checks he'd written were made out to a shell account. They had done this before, Miss Park told me, or something very like it. The cousin would write the checks. Christine would provide access. They were careful enough to stay under amounts that trigger automatic flags, patient enough to do it slowly over time. My checkbook showed 6 months of history. I went back and looked. I had been missing money since March, small amounts, never more than $400 at a time. I do my banking online, and I am careful, but I am also a woman who trusted that her home was safe, and I had not been looking for what I was looking at now. 12 checks I hadn't written, $3,100 total. When my son confronted Christine, she did not deny it immediately. "That surprised me," she cried. She said the cousin had pressured her, that she hadn't known it would go on this long, that she'd told him they had to stop. My son has told me some of what she said, and I have chosen not to know all of it. That is his marriage. I have my own grief to carry. What I know is that I pressed charges. Ms. Park guided me through every step, and I want to be clear that if you are ever in a situation where someone tells you that you won't be believed or that it isn't worth the trouble, you find yourself a Ms. Park, and you let her disagree with that on your behalf. Christine pled guilty. Her cousin pled guilty. The sentencing was in the spring. Probation for Christine, who cooperated fully and had no prior record, and 18 months for her cousin, who did. Both were ordered to make full restitution to me. I have received every cent. My son and Christine's are separated now. I did not ask for this, and I will not pretend it doesn't hurt me, because it does. He is my child, and his pain is my pain, even when that pain comes from choices that needed to be made. He is in therapy. So am I. We talk more now than we did before all of this, which is one of the stranger outcomes of a terrible year. Beverly, my next-door neighbor, the one who has my legitimate spare key, came over the week after the sentencing and brought a cough cake. We sat at my kitchen table. That table has seen a lot, and she said, "You know what gets me?" She sat right here at Thanksgiving, and she was already planning it. "I know," I said. "And you never suspected." "No," I said. "I suspected myself. That is the part I keep coming back to. Not the betrayal, exactly. Betrayal is painful, but it's comprehensible. It has human shape. I can put it somewhere in my understanding and leave it there. What I come back to is those months of doubting myself. Moving through my own house feeling like a stranger in it. Wondering whether the fogginess I felt was the beginning of something I couldn't come back from. Deciding not to say anything because saying it out loud might make it real. I was not losing my mind. My house was being walked through. My things were being touched and replaced. My finances were being quietly hollowed out by someone who had calculated that I would sooner doubt my own memory than suspect my family. That calculation was almost right. Dottie, my mail carrier, retired last June. Her last day on the route, I was waiting at the end of the driveway with a card and a gift certificate to the garden nursery she's mentioned 100 times. She hugged me harder than I expected. "You know," she said, "I almost didn't say anything. I thought maybe it was none of my business." "I'm very glad you decided it was," I said. She laughed and got back in her truck, and I watched her drive off down the street, stopping at every mailbox, same as always. Augusta from my watercolor class has started bringing her granddaughter to our Thursday sessions. The girl is 13, all elbows and opinions, and she takes to watercolor the way some people simply take to things, naturally, without trying to control it. Last week, she painted a field of tall grass in afternoon light, and I stood behind her for a long time without saying a word. "Is it okay?" she asked, turning around. "It's more than okay," I said. "My house is mine again. I know this in the way you know something that was briefly taken from you. You feel its weight differently than you did before. I lock my doors with more attention now. I have a camera at the front door and one at the back, and I do not apologize for this to anyone. I check my accounts every week, every line, every transaction. Not out of fear, exactly. Out of the knowledge that I paid for that attention in a currency I can't get back, and I intend to spend it wisely. I am still teaching on Thursdays. I still leave at 9:47, and I still come home by 12:30. The rhythm of that day belongs to me, and I have decided that no one else's agenda gets to change it. I am 67 years old. I have raised a son and buried a husband and kept my own books for 30 years and learned to paint after 60, and I am here, still, in this house, in this life that I built. I trusted my instincts when a woman I barely knew stopped her mail truck to ask me a question. That is the thing I want you to remember, if you remember nothing else from this. The doubt they plant in you, the small daily erosion of your own certainty, is part of how it works. It only works if you let it go unchecked. Check your accounts. Trust the neighbor who parks at the curb and leans out her window to tell you something she didn't have to say. And if something in your home feels off, if the dish is in the wrong place, if the papers are shifted, if you keep losing something in a room where you never lose things, don't explain it away. Trust yourself first. That is the only advice I have, and I believe it with everything I've got.